The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Sadia Khan, the former teacher, psychologist, and relationship expert. You have an extensive background in education and developmental psychology, specializing in helping people better understand their relationships with friends, family, and most importantly, their partners. You've amassed a huge audience on social media, with many of your videos racking up millions of views. You believe that many modern relationships are fundamentally unhealthy, with most people failing to recognize their own insecurities and the impact of their childhood trauma. You've said that the rise of negative role models online is creating narcissistic women, while pornography is making men incapable of connecting on both a physical and emotional level. Sadia, welcome to London Real.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. This is a very big honor for me, so thank you so much.
I'm really excited. Your videos have been popping up all over my social.
I'm so sorry about that, by the way.
I don't know what I did.
You must be so sick of me.
Oh my gosh, but you're everywhere, and I think you're everywhere for a lot of people. And I think you are. And we were talking beforehand, you know, why do people enjoy watching you? And there's something very congruent about you when you speak about these things. And that's always why any of my guests become super popular, whether you're David Icke or you're Dorian Yates. It's because people feel these people are speaking from their heart, they're speaking congruently, and they're speaking to add value to other people. And I think you do all of that, and that's why you're here, and that's why people are listening to you. But also, if you listen to what you say, you might wonder if it's the end of the world of relationships, right?
I know, I'm very dramatic, aren't I?
Well, but I mean, maybe a lot of people would experience in their own lives the challenges they have with relationships, and they are challenging. And digital media, which we'll get into, I guess makes it all even more challenging. And it's given us all of these new pitfalls and things that, you know, our grandparents didn't have to deal with. And I don't know if you remember your grandparents' relationship, but I do. And it was at a time before the internet, and a time where people usually stayed together, and there was something beautiful and comforting about that. I don't know if we're ever going to see that again. So what is the state of the union right now when it comes to relationships? Is this the worst time ever in human history? I know you coach a lot of people, or is it that we notice it more so? What would you say is the state of play?
Unfortunately, I would say it's one of the worst times in human history, and I would say it's because we replaced duty with hedonism. In previous generations, joining together was a duty, either a spiritual duty, a relationship duty through family. There was an element of duty involved in connecting with the people that we love. And love was just one component, but it was really like, let's create a family, let's make a home for the children, let's you know, stand by God, let's do all of these things. There was an element of, I'll put my desire second, but the priority and responsibility of this relationship first. We have replaced that with a really hedonistic society. We are just byproducts of a society that has catered to our desires and pleasures. And as a result, when it comes to relationships, we are unable to delay gratification. If every need and every desire and every pleasure is not immediately satisfied, we look for replacements. And I'm not somebody who's immune to this. We do it with our phones, we do it with our clothes, even the advent of cheap clothes. Like if you don't like something, you throw it away, you get another one, order one the next day. If that's the society we're breeding, how would that not have a trickle-down effect onto relationships? If we live in a world where Amazon Prime the next day, throw out this clothes, replace, how would that not affect our emotional connections? So instead of creating connections, we're creating to hedonistic individuals who are completely individualistic, who are void of responsibility, now joining forces and creating children with that banner. So it's not the healthiest time to form a relationship, unfortunately.
Wow. So if we look back, say, 100 years ago, the marriage and the family was part of a bigger group, the community, the city, the state, the religious organization, and it was all part of one, and you had various responsibilities to your parents or to the church or to all these things. And that no longer happens.
Yeah, there was no element of desire related to marriage. It was just the next stage of life. And it was just like how you go to work. You don't necessarily desire every job role. You do it because you've got bills to pay. So marriage was the next stage of life, and you've got children to raise, and you've got money to make, and you've got a family to kind of create. And I'm not saying that was perfect, but we've now, we've made desire the primary focus behind marriage. And desire is a temporary emotion. It can't last forever, and the more connected we get with somebody, the more the desire dissipates. So of course desire is going to go. Now we've trained people into thinking if desire has depleted, you have to replace the person, rather than understanding that desire is not necessarily required in the long run, and it's not an ingredient of longevity. But we've told everybody, if you don't desire it, don't do it. And unfortunately, that makes us short-term. That will make us create short-term mating strategies, which are actually a precursor for narcissism and anti-personal personality disorder. If you look at most criminals, they tend to have one thing in common. It's lots of short-term mating strategies, because it creates a mind that uses people rather than connects with people. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, that is wild. And we'll get into this, but you've said that serial killers on death row all had a history of pornography abuse and all these other things.
Isn't that crazy that most serial killers in death row, they had an addiction to pornography. And why is that? Because pornography allows you to take all of the pleasure out, getting all of your kicks out of somebody without investing anything into them, without caring about them, without worrying about them, without even considering their well-being, and getting all of your desires out of them. So you can watch pornography, you're not worried about whether this person is consensual, whether this person went through trauma that led to this, her now becoming a sex worker or him becoming a sex worker. You're not worried if they're on drugs. All you worry about is, are you getting pleasure from this? And so that mindset going into dating is not the healthiest.
You've gone deep on this and said that we're the first ones to say, you know, no child trauma, no child abuse, no child trafficking, and yet 10 years later, those same people are performing porn that everyone just consumes avidly. And you said, isn't there something duplicitous about this?
Isn't that strange that we can all agree child trafficking is wrong? We can all agree molesting a child is wrong. We can all agree that some childhood trauma is wrong. But when we take that person's vulnerability, and now that person has only done what they know, which has gone back into sex work, we for some reason celebrate that outcome, and we watch it and we get aroused by it, which is one of the reasons I'm so confused by the women that watch pornography and the feminists that watch pornography. You advocate so much for women's rights, and you talk about patriarchy, and you define patriarchy as a pay gap or having to do chores, but you don't define patriarchy as women getting raped on camera and you're watching it, or women selling their body online for $5.99 a month and men are consuming it. You don't consider that patriarchy, but you do consider folding your husband's clothes as oppressive. So I just think we've indoctrinated women into kind of labeling their oppression as freedom, telling them actually what we've made is them commodities to men, told them that's a liberty and that's freedom, and they've gone, okay, and that's the movement now, sadly.
Well, let's talk about that, because you've said that nowadays all of the poor choices of women are celebrated, right? And so you're a sex worker, let's celebrate it.
Yeah.
You made this bad decision, let's celebrate it. You sell yourself on OnlyFans, let's celebrate it. It's now all celebrated.
Yeah.
And you said there's no longer any consequences, and you say that these women end up, I think you said, gaslighting themselves into promoting this behavior as this liberation. When you look at it and you're like, well, who are you kidding?
Yeah.
You're actually, you're not taking accountability for poor decisions, and then you're reaping whatever you sow.
That's the sad part, and this is somebody who, as a woman myself, I just realized if I was to make endless poor decisions for my mind, body and soul, there would be a positive praise outcome. So we're almost modifying women's behavior to become self-destructive. If I gained a lot of weight and I totally stopped taking care of my body, I would be celebrated body positivity. and that's not good for me. You and I both know it's not good for us not to run every day, or not to do, it's not good for us. Or if I sleep around with the wrong men and I just go and get an abortion, rather than being exercising more discretion with who I lay down with, and actually taking responsibility and think, you know what, if I sleep with you and have a baby with you, I don't want to have a baby with you, so bye, I'm not talking to you. Instead, it's like sex, 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 and abortion if need be. I'm celebrated for having that choice. And if I want to then, you know, sell my body, my personal sexual life, which is so sacred and sanctified, if I then make it a commodity, I'm seen as a really successful entrepreneur. When really what I'm doing is selling my soul. I am putting a price tag on my soul and my energy. And no matter how progressive we come, there is women who sell their body to some extent. I'm not blaming them. I'm sure there's lots of trauma and there's lots of financial issues or whatever it is. But when we make our body a commodity, we essentially remove the sanctity of sex. And therefore it makes it harder to actually see how important sex is. And therefore we give it frivolously, and then we can't connect with people, because the deepest form of connection should be sex. But if I'm giving it to this uncle, that friend, and that online, how am I able to preserve the spirituality behind it? So I'm basically selling all the parts of women that make them beautiful. I'm now turning it into a product. And therefore we are more oppressed than we've ever been, but we've labeled it as liberty.
But the feminists celebrate that as female empowerment.
What is empowering about being $5.99 for a dirty man that is probably doing all sorts with your pictures? I've never understood that. I am now the customer to this dirty old man or this creepy young boy. He's my customer. So now I have to please him. I basically work for him. So I'm taking probably the most perverse members of men in society and becoming a slave to their desires. And I'm labeling that as empowering. Because if you take respectable men, they probably wouldn't want me to do that. So I'm taking the worst cohort of men and becoming a product for their desires and labeling it as empowering. And I'm not judging the women. It's a dual issue, both men and women, because I'm sure there's financial issues, but it's just a glorification of it that I find insane and sad.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well,
from a man's perspective?
Well, and also on that note, like, you take it all the way and it becomes, I'm selling, you know, lurid videos on OnlyFans. But if you take it part way, then you have women that create social media accounts that get attention based on certain types of behaviors. And so there's a spectrum of what you're talking about. Because a lot of people might listen and say, well, I would never do that. But now everybody's on that spectrum to a certain extent.
To some extent.
Because well, let's talk about that, because women get rewarded by certain behaviors online that you say promotes narcissism. When sometimes they're the first one to say men are the narcissists. But I want to dive in and see, because this digital availability of everything affects the sexes differently. And so for women, is it that spectrum of I post a photo on Instagram, or I'm the OnlyFans account here, or I'm making porn, and like where does that spectrum lie, and what are the different behaviors, and what does it promote people doing? The
moment you can weaponize any area of that spectrum, you fall into the more antisocial narcissistic category. And what I mean by that is, I might be not, you know, posting too much, but the moment I weaponize it, the moment I am annoyed with my partner and I want a new partner, or the moment I want to kind of get some extrinsic kind of thrills, cheap thrills, and I then use Instagram as almost a device to fill that void or fill that empty, low self-esteem, then I'm starting to fall on the spectrum. It's not really what you post, it's the intention behind it. And if there's an element of I'm using this device to fill a hole or to add self-esteem, I'm essentially relying on, it's like eating junk food to for nutrients. It won't do it. Yeah, all it will do is create you a feedback loop, or a loop of desiring more likes and comments and creating more fake self-esteem, when really what women used to do is have to work on their nurturing side in order to be valuable. They had to work on their skills to be valuable. We had grandmothers who would be able to sew a dress for us. I'm not saying I can do that. I'm still very useless on that sense, but you know, they would be able to cook you something from scratch, and they'd be able to sew something, or they'd be so useful. Now we're making ourselves less useful and just essentially just an object of desire, and therefore we have temporary value, because we all know that looks fade. And so essentially we're making women almost replaceable. Because if you're just a pretty face and you're adding no other value, men are going to replace us with AI. Whereas if you add some intrinsic value, you're irreplaceable as a woman. My grandma, my mother, your mother, I'm sure your grandma, irreplaceable women. Yeah. But unfortunately, if I'm just a pretty face, I'm so replaceable by robots. Essentially, you'll be replaced by robots, and at least robots actually listen and are nice to you. Yeah.
So as a female, it's become so easy to post that picture on Instagram, show a little more booty, get a lot more likes, get some feedback, whether your intentions are good, bad, or whatever, but you're going to get the attention, you're going to get the DMs, you're going to get a release, some dopamine. Yeah. At the same time, it's men that are promoting that.
They're modifying the behavior.
Right, we're modifying the behavior, and then when we want, and then the women do that because it's a temporary fix, when in fact, if they had discipline and you know, what did I say, delayed gratification, they might work on their character, which is harder to do, but in the long run, it then makes them more valuable.
Absolutely.
The flip side is men. When we get frustrated with a situation, then we go to the porn, and the porn is there for us. It gives us, I guess, everything we want, I guess. And then we don't have to invest in ourselves to become the kind of man that doesn't need porn to find the women of our desires. Yeah. Am I explaining this correctly?
Yes, you are. Like essentially what pornography, well, the thing is, as much as I'm talking about women, they don't get here alone. Women in certain cultures will not post a bikini picture because the men in that culture will not reward that behavior. They won't reinforce it. They might reinforce the opposite, where they will go nowhere near you. But we're living in a world now where men are reinforcing that. They're reinforcing the kind of OnlyFans girls. She's getting the most followers and she's getting the most likes. So what's happening is we're modifying the women's behavior. The men are modifying it by rewarding the wrong behavior and punishing the right behavior. So the women that are actually quite discreet and working on their character don't get as many brand deals, and they don't get as much accolade on social media, and they don't get a platform. Whereas the women that are exposing themselves and selling themselves, they get the most reward and praise in this day and age. So it's not just the women's fault. We have to think about who's rewarding them, and then it's almost like a form of conditioning, a form of operant conditioning. We're kind of creating the woman that they actually don't want to be with. They're molding and rewarding and punishing all the traits until they create a woman that they actually are incompatible with, and then have to replace her with porn because they don't like the woman they created or the woman they selected. So it's dark times, unfortunately.
So as men, we're creating the kind of women that we ultimately don't want.
Exactly.
And then women are creating the type of men that they ultimately don't want.
Yeah, well, they're becoming a person they don't actually want to be, and men are creating women that they don't actually want to be with. They're liking and commenting and trying to be with that really sexy, narcissistic kind of woman, and then when they're with her, they're really disappointed. But there was plenty of nice, kind women that you ignored to focus on those women. So we're almost modifying a femininity into a person we actually can't connect with.
Now, it's one thing to like someone's post on Instagram that's that type of woman, but like there's that old song, the type you don't bring home to mama. So like, but in the real world, men can recognize a woman who is grounded and has great values and is someone they want to be with long term. So won't that always win out?
I think in the real world that applies for men of a different generation. They can definitely distinguish between women that you enjoy your time with and women you invest your time with. They can definitely distinguish that. The younger generation cannot. And the reason being is they are so over-sexualized. They are so exposed to sexual women, whether it's through pornography, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is. So they just think this is how women are. They don't know the opposite. They don't know the more chaste woman or the one that is slightly has more discretion when it comes to exposing herself. They only know the ones that are willing and prepared to do it. So this is what they think women come as. So I think the generation has changed so much that the younger generation don't have any discernment at all. And so, and it's not, again, it's not just the women's fault. The women are also being left with men who are, almost addicted to pornography, and as a result are over-sexualized as well, and therefore, she feels like she has to keep up with this kind of desires he's created in his head. So we've got this young generation that are so disconnected, but they're so sexualized. So it leads to short-term mating strategies.
Okay, and now if you're a woman and you're hearing this and they're agreeing, what can they do to not become this woman?
It's very difficult. If I'm honest, I don't know what I would be doing if I was 17 years old. So I have to put it out there. It is incredibly difficult to be a young woman in this day and age, because if you try and withhold yourself, there'll be a bunch of guys putting pressure on you on a daily basis saying, send a picture, this girl does it, that girl does it. And if you go on your For You page, all your peers are doing that. So it's incredibly difficult. The only thing I would say is that the only thing that can separate you from this situation is having a set of intrinsic values and morals that will surpass your external appearance. And what I mean by that is working on something that is unique to you. If we work on just your looks, everybody has good looks in this day and age. Everybody can put a bit of makeup on, add a filter and look great. But if you work on something that is unique to your soul, it doesn't mean you have to be super intelligent. You could just be super gifted at something, or you could be super caring, or you can be super nurturing or kind, whatever it is. If you work on something that is more intrinsic, you're more likely to be irreplaceable. And you're also more likely to derive self-esteem from that overall character, rather than just one very vacuous trait, which is, again, very difficult to do when you're 17, 16 years old.
Right.
Yeah.
And you said that looks are the only asset we have that depreciates.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so we did a nice job beating up on the girls. Now let's talk about the guys. I know you've sat down with Andrew Tate, and I know you've talked to him, and you've talked about men. And so let's flip the side. What is going on with men? What is wrong with men? Also, I also see, maybe in America, because they're always first, a way of them trying to take the masculinity out of men. And for me, it sometimes feels like that these women are trying to create men that they ultimately won't desire.
Yeah.
Maybe the same way that, like you say, social media is creating women that we ultimately don't desire.
Yeah.
But what do you make of the Andrew Tate phenomenon? What do you make of Andrew? And what do you make of the men that follow him? And then what are some of the learnings from men these days?
I think he's evolved quite a lot from when he first came out to his current state. And it's not, I mean, I don't disagree with everything he says or anything like that. I think his fundamental message is almost to kind of reclaim masculinity. And I understand that message. The only thing that I disagree with is how he packages it is through more of kind of cheap thrills again, like with young women and beautiful women on a yacht. Like if you want to be a masculine man, that's what you need. And if you want to be a masculine man, you need a nice sports car. And so that's the only thing. I think his fundamental values are correct, but how he advertises it to men and how he lures men into that is through those cheap values that I'm actually hoping men will diminish. Having a bunch of girls on a yacht won't actually fill that void and won't create that long-lasting, that masculinity that you're craving. Investing into one woman and actually being responsible for her and responsible for her well-being and your children's well-being is more likely to create masculinity than hiring a boat with a bunch of Swedish models. And so that part I disagree with. And similarly, having lots of fancy cars, again, it's a junk value. Yes, it's nice, but it doesn't actually bring you purpose in life. And it's also something that once you achieve it, it doesn't actually add anything to a man. Whereas problem solving and responsibility and self-control, these are traits that are continuous. There's only a certain amount of fast cars you can drive, but there's endless amount of self-control, responsibility and problem solving that will lead to masculinity. So I think sometimes he advertises it wrong, but I think his fundamental messages are ones that I agree with. There's a lot about, you know, setting boundaries. There's a lot about taking personal accountability. There's a lot about spirituality that I do agree with. So I would say I agree on 70%. There's certain things I disagree with, but majority on the whole I agree. What do you think of Andrew?
Also, I've heard you quote him and say, I like Andrew Tate, but I don't like his followers.
Yes.
And I've heard you say that, look, Andrew has paid the cost to be the boss.
Yes.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.